Hello and welcome to Bad Hezbollah,
the world's most morel podcast.
That's right. My name is Matt Lieb. I am going to be your most moral co-host for this podcast.
And I am Daniel Mate. I'm the other most moral co-host. Welcome to our last, if not one of our last
episodes of the
podcast. Maybe. Who knows? Depends how far this limited operation in the south of Lebanon goes. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. You really never know.
I was just going to say the last of the lunar year. I forget what year we're in, but we're about to hit Rosh Hashanah.
That's right.
And
That's
right.
High holidays, everyone.
High holidays. Days. Time of Jewish repentance and self-examination, which, especially since the advent of nationalism, we really love to do. It's a time to really reflect on how we've affected others and how the things that are happening in our lives might be a consequence of things that might be our responsibility and that we could do something about. And something called cheshbon nefesh, doing an accounting of the soul, and just an opportunity really to get things right. We love it. We're accountants. Yeah.
I was born. They gave me a little visor. It was clear and neon. They said, "Are you ready to account?" And I said, "For sins." You got that right, Ken. I said. Just a reminder to give us 5 stars in a review on all of the podcast platforms. Now, more than ever, actually, if you're on Spotify, this is a Hezbollah alert. So apparently our podcast was called out inside of an Israeli Telegram or Telegraph group. What's the name of that app?
Telegram.
Yeah, Telegram. And they told everyone, hey, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a podcast out there called Bad Hezbollah that makes fun of our Hezbollah. And they're not wrong. They
called us harsh and cynical. But they did it in Hebrew, not in English with a bad Hebrew accent. But harsh and cynical. Yeah.
In fact, a friend of the pod, what is the name of the friend of the pod?
He's such
Ido.
a good friend.
It was Ido. Yeah. Sorry,
Ido the Reliable.
Ido the Reliable sent us the post itself and did some translation for people like me. It points out that this was definitely written either with Hebrew as a second language or an English speaker who put it inside of a Google Translate. The podcast Bad Hezbollah, the world's most moral podcast, is a cynical podcast that comes out harshly against Israel and condemns Israel's Hezbollah efforts. While in contrast to them, they are angels who do not lie. Just like, wait, are they admitting to lying? Anyway,
but that's such a typical defensive Israeli Hezbollah response. Like when they get criticized, they claim that you're claiming that you're perfect.
Yes, exactly. I mean, listen.
We never said we're angels who don't lie.
We never said we're angels who don't lie. That is never words that have ever left our mouths. But I do love the idea that they're out here. What they're really mad about is that they've worked so hard on the Hezbollah. And they're like, what are you doing? Cynically making fun of our Hezbollah. We work so hard for the hashtag, would you hide me? Adam says, I'm rubber, you're an apartheid ethno state. Yeah. So anyways, they brigaded on Spotify they made a video of here's how you can give them 1 star. And so basically you go in, you click an episode, you click the button that says already watched, and then you give it 1 star.
I'm still fucking figuring out how to leave 5 stars. Every time I go, it's like, would you like to watch this episode?
Yeah.
And I guess I need to do the thing they're saying. It's just because I usually listen on some other app, or I don't listen because I fucking record the thing.
Right. Exactly.
Why should I have to listen to?
You should not have.
Why should I have to listen to myself to leave myself a fraudulent 5-star review 6 times?
Exactly. And unfortunately, they figured it out. They, unlike our boy here, Daniel Mate, who couldn't get past the how. They figured it out. They made the desert bloom.
Well, because they had the
Spotify.
why. They didn't need the. Once you have the why, you have the how, and they had They got to get our ratings down. How's that going? How's our rating?
I mean, our rating went from like 4.7 to like 4.0 or like 3.8 or something, which
that's
is
harsh. Talk about
still
harsh.
A good GPA. But if you want to help us out,
maybe in your family,
yeah, in my family, we were not good at school. Point is, if you are someone who wants to give us 5 stars in a review, please do it now on Spotify. just fight against the Hezbollah machine. And finally, shout out to producer Adam. We need to get into this episode because we have a great one. We have a fantastic guest, and a lot of things have happened since, we last spoke with y'all.
So many things.
Yeah, it's one of those things where people ask us constantly, why do you do so few episodes? We do at least one a week. And they're right. There's just too much going on. In terms of what's going on this week, oh boy. The last few days have seen an increase in the bombings and mass destruction in southern Lebanon, and it has been something where here's a rundown timeline the last few days. September 24th, Hezbollah and Israel continued to trade fire overnight. Dozens are killed, including 2 UN workers. Next day, there's long-range missiles that are shot down over Tel Aviv. And then next day at the UNGA, the U.S. and France propose a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, and Israel rejects it. And then Netanyahu says that Israel is winning. And then Israel announces on the 28th that they had killed Hassan Nasrallah.
On my fucking birthday of all days.
On your birthday. Which was, something that was largely celebrated online by both the Washington, D.C. Political class, who have no problem celebrating the death of anyone who has ever resisted Israeli occupation, and then of course those inside of Israel who were doing the same thing they've been doing for the last 12 months, making crass videos cheering at what was not just the death of Nasrallah, but hundreds of others who were killed by a 2,000-pound bomb given to them by yours truly, the Bad Hezbollah podcast. No, by the United States. It's been insane to watch, and of course, as is tradition in the U.S., every time we find out that Israel has done something that it said it wasn't going to do, a bunch of articles come out in which they say, "Oh, what? Damn, they tricked us."
Something just hit me about, because I keep hearing these 2,000-pound bombs, 2,000-pound bombs. That number 2,000 was ringing strangely in my ears, and then I realized in the Israeli national anthem, Hatikva, which means the hope, when they sing about the hope, Hatikva Bat Shnot Alpayim, which means the hope of 2,000 years, i.e. the 2,000 years of exile.
In other words,
a pound per year has been the weight of explosive rage has been accumulating for every single one of those years since the destruction of the Second Temple.
Yeah, it's a poetic in a genocidal way. But there was an article that came out in which they, once again, we've seen this over and over again, but this claim that they tricked us. This claim that oh man, I didn't know they were going to do all that. From the New York Times, a White House. So the headline: the White House thought Israel was, quote, on board with a 3-week ceasefire plan in Lebanon, and in the body.
Adam says they pulled away the 2,000-pound football,
like Lucy and.
Actually, what happened is that Biden misheard they weren't on board.
Yeah.
One of the Israeli envoys said, I'm bold of all this negotiating.
Every day it's the same thing.
We pretend to want a ceasefire.
And every day we do the same thing. Sure. And then don't do it. So it said a White House spokesperson said the Biden administration believed Israel's government was, quote, on board with the proposed ceasefire for 21 days between Israel and Hezbollah when the United States and 10 other countries unveiled the idea Wednesday night. John Kirby, friend of the pod, the White House's national security spokesperson, said the allies would not have made the proposal public otherwise, which I love because they're just like, listen, We're down for the death, but we just don't like being humiliated in public.
It's as if this doesn't happen every single time, just like Lucy and the football. I mean, in fact, it's true. They wouldn't have made it public unless they knew that Israel would then completely contradict it, which is the entire kayfabe. It's the entire shtick.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
we just can't control these good friends of ours, and we it's a communication thing, you know.
Yeah.
It must be a language thing.
It's happened so often that you just can't like the real humiliation here is how much they trust the Israeli government not to publicly humiliate them.
That's
like
right.
that to me is almost more humiliating. It's the fact that you keep having to write these articles and they're just like, hey man, I really thought that this time they weren't gonna like lie to us to our face.
They're like, okay, promise, just promise you won't bomb Lebanon during the ceasefire talks. And Israel looks them in the face like Kevin McDonald and Kids in the Hall and says, "Will do."
Yeah.
and then they're like, "You said you promised. You're the king of your promises." And they go, "Slip my mind."
Yeah, it is just like, and you see now, Biden not even attempting damage control. I don't see any attempts at damage control anywhere. I just see the same tired, hey, saying we want a ceasefire while continuing to give them money for aid. I mean, Israel says it has secured $8.7 billion in a U.S. aid package. It just, at this point, why even have PR? And finally, this is all led up to today, Netanyahu giving a brief speech to the people of Iran.
Oh, that's so nice. I bet they were feeling left out because all the other countries in the region were getting little messages from the school principal.
Exactly. Everyone else getting a note. It's like Valentine's Day when you're just like, wait, how come I haven't gotten a note that says I love you with some candy on it? And that's what they got.
Why haven't I got a note saying, it's not you I'm after, it's your parents and your entire family. So just stay at school a little later today. Don't go home. And when you get home, there'll be some nice men.
Yeah.
To take you to a new home.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. This time I feel like, as opposed to others, direct addresses to the people of wherever he's about to bomb, it felt almost explicitly threatening rather than implicitly. And let me play a little bit of that for all y'all.
I want to address you, the people of Iran. Every day, you see a regime that subjugates you make fiery speeches about defending Lebanon, defending Gaza. Every day, their puppets are eliminated. Ask Mohammed Deif. Ask Nasrallah. There is nowhere in the Middle East Israel cannot reach. There's nowhere we will not go to protect our people and protect our country. You deserve better. Your children deserve better. The entire world deserves better. I know you don't support the rapists and murderers of Hamas and Hezbollah, but your leaders do. You deserve more. The people of Iran should know Israel stands with you. May we together know a future of prosperity and peace.
He could barely keep in the maniacal laughter.
I know. It's like at this point, he should be doing these addresses from like a sort of like a, I don't know, wherever the Joker's lair is in Batman.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's such a just this feeling regarding every speech he does in which he is just threatening civilians and saying, it's not you that I'm trying to kill, it's your leaders, but I have to kill a few of you in order to get your leaders. And it's just like it's getting to a point now where I don't know how anyone with a conscience can support this, and yet it still happens, which is why we have a great guest today. A guest who really summarizes all of that that feeling of living in the Shadowlands, in alternate realities, with mirror selves. Someone who is an activist and an author of a book called Doppelganger, which I just read, which is one of the most fantastic summations of the current reality that we live in. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, welcome Naomi Klein. Hey.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I was trying to give you 5 stars on Spotify.
Oh, thank you.
We appreciate that.
But I listen on another platform.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. I know. I mean, listen, hey, 5 stars on whatever platform that you listen on, whether it's Spotify or anyways. The point is I'm flattered that you would listen to this at all, because this podcast was born out of just frustration at the world and the feeling of going insane, which you, in your book Doppelganger, do a great job of.
I literally go insane in the book. Yeah,
you do. I mean, we're watching your descent into, I wouldn't say madness, but you go from someone who is largely, the book starts out with you talking about your own personal doppelganger, Naomi Wolf, who is someone that people have confused you for a long time, and since kind of Naomi Wolf's turn into conspiracy and other things, the comparison has been less flattering. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is, as I was reading the book, I did not know that eventually we were getting to this comparison with Israel. But as I was reading it, I was going, man, this really feels like how it feels to be a diaspora Jew. Just having this twin, this doppelganger, this thing that people confuse you for. All Jews are Zionists, all Jews are Israeli, whether it's by birth or by blood. And having to try to set the record straight while being drowned by a sea of people giving you, like reinforcing the false narrative. So I want to ask, when this book was conceived, did you see it as going to this place of, this comparison with the Jewish state?
Well, I definitely found the book while writing the book. So it wasn't like my previous books where I had like a very clear outline and thesis that I was trying to prove. Like, this is more creative nonfiction. So originally it was going to be an essay. I knew I wanted it to kind of tackle anti-Semitism as the sort of original conspiracy theory, because the book is ultimately about conspiracy culture, right? Because my doppelganger, Naomi Wolf, is kind of a doppelganger of herself, right? She's one of these people who we all know, who we are like, whatever happened to that person? They used to be this and now they're that, right? And so she's one of those people. There's been many articles like, whatever happened to her? She used to be this kind of liberal feminist, and now she's hanging out with Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, and she's, taking pictures of clouds and talking about how, it's a government plot or whatever, I
didn't know she was anti-cloud.
She's a cloud truther.
She's a cloud truther.
Yeah. So that interests me a lot. Like, and as I talk to people about this, I would have these conversations like, oh my God, I can't talk to my sister. I can't talk to my uncle. Right. So it was feeling, I wrote it during the pandemic, of like, the world has gotten strange. It's gotten uncanny. Freud talks about the uncanny as like the familiar, when the familiar becomes strange, right? Doppelgangers are the most uncanny thing that can happen to you, because you are the most familiar thing to you in the world. So if there's another, Matt Lieb walking around who people think is you, and you come face to face with that person, that is the essence of uncanniness, right?
Absolutely. And there used to be another there was a Matt Lieberman that I would follow online because he was doing very well. This is back when I was in college. And then one day I met him, and I was like, I'm taller, so it's fine.
There's a Spanish billionaire named Daniel Mate with the exact same same spelling of my last name. Yeah. He's in chemicals or minerals or something. He's like a resources
that could be helpful
billionaire. And I got an email from, I don't know, citations.com being like, Daniel Mate, are you the same Daniel Mate who wrote, and then it's some paper on, I don't
chemicals?
Know, exploiting workers, or I don't know what the fuck. So that's an interesting double life.
Well, there's a Naomi Klein in New Zealand who has so much dirt on me because people are constantly sending her emails that are intended to me for me, and she I'm sure she's a Zionist because she has never forwarded a single one or tried. She's just collecting stuff.
She's hoarding it for her
for the big reveal one
yeah
day.
yeah her eventual
so much about this woman. Yeah,
her eventual book.
Yeah. But so I saw the sort of figure of the doppelganger as a way to get at a bunch of stuff that I wanted to get at. I wanted to get at personal branding. I wanted to get at AI. I wanted all these ways that we create doubles of ourselves, that other people create doubles of us, right? But then, one day my mom was like, it's just because you're both basically loudmouth Jewesses, that's like, that's,
right.
And then I'm like, oh, I guess I'm going to have to get into the Jewish thing, right? Because it's part of it. It's part of, my mom said, you're a type. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You're both people see you as a type.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things I do in the book is read novels about doppelgangers. And there is a whole sort of subgenre of fiction about this. And anyway, long story short, this brings me to Philip Roth, which brings us to Israel, which brings us to the doppelganger of the new Jew versus the old. This is what you're talking about, Matt. And it's very rich because Operation Shylock, which is his best doppelganger novel, and all of Philip Roth's novels are doppelganger novels in one way or another. And the protagonist is always like, is that Philip Roth? Is it not?
Sure, right. Right.
But then with Operation Shylock, which is kind of his masterpiece, I would argue.
Which is, I would say, is an amazing thing to argue, because it is, for me, it was my favorite Philip Roth novel, but I felt like I'd never heard anyone talk about it. People always bring up like American Pastoral or Portnoy's Complaint.
Yeah, that's the only one that comes to mind for me. Portnoy.
And I love Portnoy. I mean, in terms of, I relate to a guy who, will fuck a liver. Like
J.D. Vance, my God.
Yeah. Listen, we've all been there. We've all been, young and horny and saw something and went for it. But this book in particular was something where I felt like he was either outing himself as a Zionist or an anti-Zionist, and I wasn't sure, which you cover in the.
Can we give a little synopsis of the novel, because I've never read it? What's the premise?
All right, well, why don't you go read it and then we'll just.
Fair enough.
Yeah. We'll pause
Adam, you can edit out 17 days, because it'll take me at least that long.
It's a short read, but essentially Philip Roth is or at least the protagonist of the book is named Philip Roth, who's written all of Philip Roth's novels, and he finds out there's another Philip Roth, someone who's pretending to be Philip Roth, who's in Israel and is giving speeches about how Jews need to abandon Zionism and go for diasporism. That's essentially the thing. That's
it's and this, we should say, it's written in the early 90s, and he calls himself a diasporist, and he's arguing for a reverse exodus from the state of Israel. All the Jews should go back to Poland. He actually meets with Lech Walesa.
Yes.
And it kind of makes a deal as the famous novelist Philip Roth. And he's arguing that Israel has become, a coffin for world Jewry, and it was a very bad idea, and it has to stop. And so this becomes a vehicle to look at different kinds of doppelgangers. Everything from the book is called Operation Shylock because part of the big idea of the book is that Shylock, Shakespeare's Shylock, is the doppelganger of all Jews, right? So that is, and this is a familiar idea for anyone who's written about race and ethnicity. That is what prejudice is. That's what racial hatred is. It's the world creating a double of you and projecting it onto you, right? They have an idea of what the Jew is. And so they meet you and it's like, well, you seem nice, but I could kind of picture you, getting your pound of flesh or whatever. So it's the character they have in their brain that they're projecting onto you. And so the other thing that goes on in the book is, so there's a trial, a real world trial going on in Jerusalem of a man who is thought to be a Nazi war criminal, and then this idea of the fascist as a sort of like they have their double, which is that sort of family man, good neighbor, and so on. He's thought to be Ivan the Terrible. But then there's a lot of really good anti-Zionist content in Shylock. It is a mess of a book in that it isn't clear what he thinks. There's all kinds of terrible stereotypes of both women and Palestinians. There's a sort of a Saeed-esque character. But really, it's kind of about how Israel's driven everybody insane.
Yes.
And the book is insane, and it's, you know, and it really is quite anti-Zionist. But he sort of pulls his punches at the end, or does he? Anyway, it's worth reading. It's worth reading as an artifact because he pushed it, I would say, as far as anyone was pushing it in the early 90s.
Sure.
And he is the original self-hating Jew in the sense that he was attacked by the Jewish establishment and rabbis for failing to represent the Jews properly.
Yeah, which I find so funny because it's just the idea that, I mean, throughout the history of Jews in arts and, you know, media and whatnot, like the poking fun at ourselves has been something that I think we've done so much it's almost like you expect it. But imagining Philip Roth going too far, where they're like, "Listen, we can take a little self-hatred, but you really seem to loathe yourself." Like the idea that he is the most self-hating Jew is very funny to me. Yeah. But you know, you mentioned Shylock, the character in which, you know, from Merchant of Venice, and the way that people can kind of look at Jews and, you know, we may be nice, we may be all different in different ways, but there's this racialized thing, right? And that's what a lot of anti-Semitism stems from is, oh, but they're different in a way that is sinister and whatnot. In the book, one of the things I really enjoy is the way in which you don't otherize anti-Semitism as apart from other types of racism. And I think that's something that, at least in the last 11 months, you've really seen on overdrive. The idea that what has happened in the history of Jews is somehow transcends all other forms of ethnic hatred or bigotry, racism. Like, it is the worst type of racism is the way it's being described. And therefore, anything is justified in stamping it out. And
including completely enacting every single one of its core stereotypes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like whoever we have to become in order to defeat the anti-Semites, including the anti-Semites' most feverish fever dream of us.
Yes.
I know.
Is just, this is the hard time I'm having with it, honestly.
Yeah,
I'm
too.
looking out into the world now and I see Jews and I imagine Zionism going on in their heads, and immediately I'm seeing them as a prototype of a rather, like, I don't like it. I was at synagogue the other night. I'll talk about this some other time, but just being in a room full of Jews for the first time, just being Jews since October 7th, I haven't put myself in rooms like that. And I could hear my own internalized, or I could hear this thing going on inside of me of a kind of real suspicion and hostility of these people, because if they believe, and it turns out there was many anti-Zionists in the room. I didn't know there was.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was this a progressive synagogue or?
Well, it was at a kind of, it was kind of a wholesale, so to speak, Jewish gathering of various congregations at the Park Slope Jewish Center. So there was a lot of different groups represented, but it's tough to tell. But again, now it's all pure projection. You know, I'm just I'm looking at all the kippot and I'm projecting all of my ideas of what's going on behind those skulls. And it turned out that there were some strong anti-Zionist Jews in the room. There were some more liberal Zionist Jews in the room, probably, and they were keeping the rhetoric away from, at least in English, they were keeping the conversation away from direct politics. We were talking about everyone's grief and the division and stuff like that, stuff that people could, uncontroversial stuff. But anyway, my point is, I was observing in myself a high degree of activation. Where I'm associating my own people with some of the worst things people believe about us. Yeah. And then I'm noticing that and I'm like, I don't like that. And maybe the Zionists are right about me. Maybe I am a self-hating Jew. But then I'm thinking, there's that fucking Israeli flag at the front of the room.
Right.
Look at that flag. And then there's the U.S. flag. And it was totally uncanny.
Yeah.
It was totally uncanny. And I feel like I've always lived in a world where anti-Semitism is either a thing of a disastrous, catastrophic thing of the past, or a really absurd thing of some present, but not super close to me. But right now, it's like both the horrible reality of anti-Semites and what they believe and what they're capable of, but also the horrible reality of what Jews are capable of and what Jews are publicly performing right now in their fealty to this golden calf, as you called it, of Zionism. It was almost too much to take sitting there. And I was really glad I was there rather than staying at home and not engaging, because I was like, this is the stuff that's going on in our collective unconscious right now. I hope that makes some kind of sense. There's no question at the end of that, except just to put
it's
some
scary.
stuff in,
Yeah. And I mean, I say this like, I was talking earlier about my mom saying it's anti-Semitism. I mean, I'm not saying I agree. And I'm like you, Daniel. I mean, I feel like I have not experienced a lot of anti-Semitism in my life, unless I'm just very naive and I don't realize that people are thinking about the fact that I'm Jewish all the time. The only time I experienced direct anti-Semitism was when I was living in England when I was 10, where there was like Jew as a schoolyard taunt along with Irish, I mean, what I experienced more of growing up in Montreal was Jews being anti-Moroccan, like Ashkenazi Jews being anti-Moroccan Jew, because there were a lot of Moroccan Jews in Montreal, and there was a lot of racism within the Jewish community. That's what my bat mitzvah speech was about.
Really?
Yeah, but this question around the exceptionalism of anti-Semitism. I mean, every hatred is different. Every hatred has its own texture. It has its own tropes. It has every hatred is different. But this idea that there's something extra special, right, about Jew hatred that is completely primordial, right? It will always be. It's this incredibly pessimistic. I think it would be called Judeo-pessimistic. And there are people who make the same argument about anti-Blackness, right? That it's just like it's outside of time. It's so encoded in what it means to, in the, sort of the arc of human history. And very interestingly, that this is the world Netanyahu grew up in. This is his father's scholarship. His father was an academic, and he his research, I actually know this mainly from the novel The Netanyahus, but I went back and it's true that his scholarship was all about proving that that there was that during the Inquisition, even if Jews converted, right? So it wasn't about the thing that supposedly it was about, what Jews did or anything like that. That even when Jews converted, the hatred of Jews was so extreme that they would, be discovered as closet Jews or whatever, and burned at the stake and so on. But the point of it is to prove that you can't change it, right? Like the point of it being primordial, the point of it being outside of time, it is the argument for Zionism, right? It is because if it's like other hatreds, then it can be covered by, the UN Declaration, on human rights. I mean, it can be governed by a universalism, right, which is supposed to address all the forms of hatred, right?
And doesn't pretend that someday it's going to wipe any of them out, but we can find ways to minimize the harms,
exactly.
And that no one group ever gets to, no one minority group ever gets to not face the consequences.
No curing.
There's
no curing that.
There ain't no cure for that.
You can, and so I think that like you're saying, this specialness of anti-Semitism, right, and needing its own definitions, but not just needing its own definitions, needing its own country, needing its own special laws.
Yes.
So much so that in protecting that special, all of those exceptions, it's willing to bring down the entire international architecture of universal human rights, right? Which is where we are right now, and it's that incredibly unhinged moment. I mean, in some ways, that is the sort of ultimate twinning, right? Like out of the Holocaust, you get these two, you get this kind of, I've described it as kind of like the fork in the roads, right? Like, you have the whole architecture of international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, the Genocide Conventions, all of it. And then you also have the ethno-state, right? Which is this idea that actually none of that is going to work against anti-Semitism. So there can only be a fortress. You can only just put a gun to its head and force it into submission. I mean, just thinking about that disgusting clip you just played by Netanyahu, right?
Yeah.
Like just the ultimate sort of like hostage vibe, right?
Yeah.
Like we will force you. And so you actually can't hedge your bets like that with universalism. Like you actually have to go all in. Like we really do believe that one set of rules applies to everyone, or the exception becomes the rule. And that's the moment that we're in now.
Yeah.
That is so, so terrifying.
And
but yeah, all the doubles with Israel are just, I mean, it gets at the sort of the anti-Semitism at the heart of Zionism, right?
Yes.
Because the new Jew, the figure of the new Jew, loathes the old Jew.
Yes.
Right? It's full of disdain. It's constantly blaming Jews for the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the work of de-exceptionalism, which I think we really need to work on in so many ways, right? It brings us back to the Holocaust, because the Holocaust was also lifted out of history, right? And it was treated as a special kind of genocide that can't, in fact, it's anti-Semitic to even put it into dialogue with history, right?
Yes.
And so that was where what I really didn't expect this research to take me to was this whole body of literature, which I'm embarrassed to say I did not know, which was, all of the scholarship from anti-colonial thinkers, from, from W.B. Du Bois to Nehru, to Aimé Césaire, who were saying at the time, European fascism is a doppelganger, a twin, to use Nehru's phrase, a demon, to use Césaire's phrase, of European colonialism and imperialism. And it was treated like, so that at the time it was being understood by the Allies as, this is such a rupture, this is such an exception. And this is how you've treated Black and brown people all over the world.
Yeah, and you point that out, in Doppelganger, just the amount of ethno-fascism, just in the way that Nazis modeled themselves after American race science and American
very open
eugenics.
about it. Yeah. Yes. So why didn't we get this story in our Holocaust education? I mean, did either of you get this?
No.
Oh, no, not at all.
Yeah.
It's been a shocking, only in the past year have I been exposed to the notion that, the reason Nazism is so horrifying to white Westerners is that this kind of treatment of human beings came home.
Yes.
Happened in the wrong place.
Right.
And that the concentration camps were invented somewhere else,
And it implicates us in what we have otherized as the holy greatest act of human depravity in history, which is the Holocaust. And to be implicated in that in the slightest takes us away from our hero narrative in the West. The West is the hero that came to the rescue of the Jews, and then created the state of Israel. It is
right. And if this history is confronted, which is, I mean, it's not like a hidden history. The Nazis were very open about the fact that they thought that the, Indian reservation system was it's a model for the ghettos. I mean, Hitler there's all of these speeches that I had drawn in the book where he's saying of the Ukrainians, we'll give them beads like they gave to the Indians, and all the things that colonized people like. Where it was most influenced, they were most influenced by Germany's own colonial adventures in Africa, and the sort of technologies of genocide and concentration camps came directly from the Nama and Herero genocide.
Right.
Someone needs to rewrite that. First they came for the Jews, poem, which everyone loves to trot out.
Yes.
No, first they did not come for the Jews.
No.
Yeah.
First they came from people way the fuck over there.
Daniel, do that. Make a song. Do something.
Yes.
First they came for the Haida Gwaii people. First they came, first they came for the Lenape people.
And here's something else. I feel like this generation, you mentioned Haida Gwaii, like our generation.
That's the First Nations from British Columbia. Matt.
Yeah, like I have a son who's 12. He since kindergarten he has had in the curriculum of his school quite a lot about the residential school system in Canada, the so-called residential school system, and the fact that it's genocide. They just actually, this week is Orange Shirt Day, where all the kids since kindergarten for him. They wear their orange shirts, which is in solidarity with Indigenous people fighting for justice from the residential school system. The point is, I didn't have this education, and I think what's freaking Zionists out so much is that this generation, like the generation of the encampments, see the obvious connections. Like when my kid learns that they banned Indigenous people from speaking their language, from practicing their ceremonies, and then he hears about the same thing about Jews, he's like, well, it's the same thing. Like, it's a version of the same thing.
Right.
And so he never got the rules that you're not supposed to compare.
Right.
It's very obvious. I think it's very obvious to this whole generation. And the problem with that for Zionists is that then they lose their argument for exceptionalism for the state of Israel. So they're running around playing whack-a-mole, trying to prevent people from seeing connections. And they're like, no, they just need more Holocaust education.
Right.
I don't think that's going to fix it for them.
And of course, their rule functionally has always been, y'all never compare, and we will always compare.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you shall never compare anything anyone else goes through to our version of what we went through. But we will always compare anything anyone ever does in response to anything we do to the worst of what we went through.
I have trouble stopping myself from doing it. I'm buying a new car, and the financing people said 5.4% APR, and I was just like,
"What is this, Treblinka?
This is my Holocaust." I said, this is the most anti-Semitic thing I've ever heard. And yeah, there's just like the amount of people who get called out and who get, not just like, called out on the internet, but people who have like lost employment and people who have lost friends because they dare to look at the situation in Gaza and see that it is a genocide. And the idea that even the word genocide is owned, is by the Holocaust.
I think we need to hold on to the specificities of these different historical events, which are genuinely different. And there is an escalation, and it's not a competition, right? I mean, what the Nazis did was the first industrial scale mass machinery,
right.
Mass death, right?
Yes.
And because I think every genocide is profoundly impacted by the technologies of its time, right? This was the first Fordist genocide, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be in conversation and in history with the previous genocides that informed so many aspects of it, right?
Yeah.
And the ways that genocide is feeding the current genocide,
yes.
right? Which is also different, right? I mean, I think that there's this desire for things to be the same, which is really boring. I mean, first of all, we have a genocide convention precisely because there isn't just one genocide. And it allows us to identify commonalities across difference, right? And so that we can identify that annihilatory logic, which is absolutely a through line, in human history. And so, I mean, I don't like whether it's capitalized or not. I mean, what's dangerous is if it is exceptionalized, and that exceptionalization becomes the rationale for further exceptionalization, which it did, right? Like there's a reason why it needed to be exceptionalized. And the reason is multi-directional. Like you mentioned, the Allies wanted it to be exceptional, because if it wasn't, they'd have to look in the mirror at what Hitler learned from them. And then suddenly they're having to deal with their own genocidal histories and present, right? They don't want to do that. They want to come out, like you said, Matt, they want to come out the heroes, right? They want to come out cleaner than before, right? Which they did. They also want to pivot to the Cold War, which they also did. So that, that was, because there was also a lot of, like, the comparisons that were allowed were comparisons with Stalin, but that's a whole other
right.
Issue,
that's right. That's right.
But I feel like we're only, because so much of this history was, and so much of the scholarship that did draw these connections was suppressed, not part of Holocaust education. I don't even think we've begun to understand the psychology of why there was that need for that kind of exceptionalism and how that manifests today in this, like what you were talking about earlier, Daniel, about like, what is this drive to fulfill every single anti-Semitic dangerous stereotype? Like, it's almost like a death drive that we're seeing now. And it's terrifying. It doesn't just affect them, it affects every Jew in the world, right? If you're fulfilling out in the open. And I think it has something to do, and this is sort of a tricky thing to talk about, but if we understand that European fascism in the 1930s, 40s is colonialism coming to the heart of Europe and inflicted on people who saw themselves as white, or were sort of on that sort of border between white and non-white, right? And it also depends on which Jews we're talking about, right? Different shtetl Jews, different, than rich,
city Jews.
City Jews, And I think for those folks, who, as we know, are the architects of Zionism, there's a lot of overlap there. Yeah. There was something about being treated as Black, right? That was a particular kind of humiliation, right? And it's a humiliation that has been metabolized as equality. Justice is us being able to be as fucking racist and genocidal as you white people were. That's why I say in the book that, in Israel, the mantle of whiteness is passed on to the Jews and called reparations. And what's the whitest thing you can possibly do?
Genocide. Ethnic cleansing, and the destruction of indigenous peoples.
And
or as we joked on the podcast before, that the extra bonus privilege of getting to Hannibal directive ourselves. It's like, it's like, why should everyone else get to kill Jews? Now now we get to order the killing of Jews under dire circumstances.
Doing anti-Semitism is the highest level of whiteness that you can attain. So,
and there's a kind of I dare you element to all of this ways in which we're just kind of like there is this fulfilling of all these stereotypes. It's like, I dare you to say the thing,
Rabbi Shmuley did it in his Purim costume. He couldn't wait to dress up as what he thought Candace Owens' idea is of a stereotypical Jew. And in so doing, he gave rise to his imagination of her imagination. Now, I'm certain that her imagination of a stereotypical Jew maybe isn't a place I'd want to hang out. But his imagination of her imagination was this grotesque, hook-nosed, payist.
Yeah.
And so here's the
he had a shirt on that said like money, or it was just like he's
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Do you know who Rabbi Shmuley Boteach is?
Unfortunately, I do.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen this latest chapter in his long history.
This is back in
many chapters.
Back in the spring on Purim, he dressed up and put it on Twitter as his idea of an anti-Semite's idea of a typical Jew, and it's basically a nightmare version of himself. Right. And it was like a furry costume. It was like he's getting to live through the imagined id of someone else who hates him. But it was incredible.
Is this the ultimate way to prove that you're safe, or that you're free, that you fulfill the worst stereotypes and you're still okay? What is going on?
I like to imagine what it is it's trying to portray the anti-Semites version of a Jew, in which you are, looking at a literal demon, right?
Yeah.
And say like, and then say this is what everyone is doing to us. They are turning us into this being. When they see us, when they talk to us, when they tell us that Israel is doing crimes, this is the image that this is the person that they're talking to. It's a way of almost delegitimizing someone's criticism by saying, well, no, in your mind, we are. You are seeing someone with horns and a big hooked nose and a tail, and almost like laughing at the idea. I just see it as delegitimization of criticism. It's a way of like you're trying to mock someone. Now, in the case of Candace Owens, she might actually believe some really anti-Semitic things. But this is, this kind of caricature of anyone who speaks out against Israel as being an anti-Semite. It's almost like a way of trying to own them via painting them as being insane.
Well, there's
a lot of painting others as being insane by doing the most insane act you can think of, and it.
Well, it's trying to do in some ways what gangster rappers were doing in the early 90s, like being like, oh, you're so scared of us. You made us this way. And now you're going to judge us for it. A group like NWA was trolling the country in a sense, but also rebuking the country. Right. And both celebrating and lamenting the stereotypes that they've been forced to live inside of. But for me, like now when you've got fucking war pigs like Shmuley and people pulling this same kind of maneuver, being like, "Hi, I know what you think of me." It's the
but it's the ultimate power trip. Is the point? It's the it's an idea. I dare you.
It is an I dare you.
The reason why, there are various sort of theories around what made the Holocaust different, right? Than when people are rationalizing why it deserves to be seen in a category of its own. And, it's not the number of people, because indigenous people in the Americas, get that one, right?
Yeah. And it's certainly not the duration of it, because it was relatively quick.
And one of the things that you hear is this assimilation, right? They were so assimilated, right? And that is quite unique.
That is.
But that is, I think, what we're talking about in a way, right? Like when I say, there's a humiliation in thinking you were in the club and then getting kicked out of the club.
Yes.
Right? And so how do you metabolize that humiliation? Because humiliation is a very dangerous thing, right? Especially humiliated men are very, very dangerous. And there's a parallel with Hindu nationalism in India, as many people have pointed out, right? There's a humiliation of colonialism, particularly for men, who are sort of demoted, right? In the sort of the hierarchy of the family. And I think that there's a ferocity that comes back to prove, that you are in charge. And I don't think you can understand Israeli society without sort of contending with injured masculinity as a driving force.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you look at the model of the new Jew, and you can't help but seeing it only existing in opposition to the weak diasporic Jew, and you can only see it as like, we will no longer be humiliated by having allergies and reading books about us having sex with livers
and eczema and sunburns, and of course, what was October 7th but a huge humiliation?
Yes,
that and that's why that's why it became this fount of morbid fantasy. I mean, they had to invent more and more outlandish atrocities. It's not enough to say we got shocked and hurt and killed and scared on that day. Our bubble got burst and we looked weak.
Which is what Nasrallah said, and they'll never forgive him for that. Right?
No, no, absolutely
not. That they
not.
were revealed, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Well, we need to take a quick commercial break. But Naomi, you'll be able to stick around for a little more?
Speaking of humiliation.
Speaking of humiliations.
We need to let people sell you things.
Yeah. We don't know what they are. If they're bad, don't do it. But stick around, everyone. We will be right back. And we're back.
I got my orange shirt. It's Orange Shirt Day, as Naomi said back in Canada.
Oh, look at that.
This is my Every Child Matters.
Every Child Matters.
Very cool.
Yeah.
One day the United States will have one too.
Man, this is like I'm doing a podcast with two Canadians here, and I feel like as bad as Canada is on a lot of stuff, you guys have so much. You guys are so much better than us. It sucks.
No.
I know, but literally, you guys got a healthcare system and everything.
We do land acknowledgments at the beginning of every first date. I mean, everything. We're so sensitive. When I fly home to Vancouver, and I walk through the international terminal, and I walk through all the beautiful native art. Like there's incredible. They've really commissioned.
Vancouver.
But a certain, the cynical part of me calls it, as I walk through it, I'm like, oh, we have a great and healthy relationship with our indigenous peoples and the past. Welcome lounge. You know, like it
yeah.
Nothing to see here. Terminal.
Hey, listen, I think I would take just a fraction of that in America. I think would be a little bit nice, even if it's coming from that liberal, I just want you to like me.
At least you'd have some virtue to signal.
Exactly. I would love it if, can I ask, every time you enter Canada, do they say welcome to Canada, sorry? Do they say sorry right to your face?
You're better than that, Matt.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Joe.
I'm not better than that. This has always been me. I've always been lame. So moving on, I want to talk about something else you mentioned in Doppelganger that always stuck with me was the idea of re-traumatization and the cycle of re-traumatization that, and almost it's distinct from the idea of remembering, the idea of learning from the past, the idea of an education in atrocity to not repeat it, but instead it being this sort of a way to keep people in a feeling of fight or flight, in a feeling of always feeling impending danger.
The re-traumatization, I think it's really it's helpful to understand the difference between remembering and re-traumatization, which I think if you just have these educations, you think it's called Memorial Day, it's called commemoration, bearing witness.
Sure.
They don't say we're here to traumatize you,
right? Yeah.
We're here to honor or whatever it is, right? I think the main thing that it keeps coming back to is it's like it's being instrumentalized, right? The Holocaust is a plot point in a larger story that has this happy ending. It has a redemption, right? And the redemption is the state of Israel, and that's always the way these museums are structured, right? Like whether it's Yad Vashem or the Holocaust Museum in Washington, or smaller versions of this,
or Birthright.
And it. Absolutely, Birthright. Wrap you in the Israeli flag, right? Tears streaming down your these young faces after going to Auschwitz Museum, and then don't worry, let's listen to Hatikva, right? So you want to get people to the most heightened state possible. I sort of took this for granted, I guess. I remember I went to Jewish day school for elementary school, and they took us to like a community center, and there was like a pile of shoes, and it was absolutely horrifying. And we also had survivors who were teachers at our school, right? So like survivors were a big part of our education. We were afraid of the survivors, frankly. Like they were the disciplinarians. They were the people who would like hit you.
They're like, hey, take this seriously. Yeah.
But we also didn't ask them any questions. Like there was so much silence around the Holocaust growing up. It was just like we would whisper like survivor. Like, we had this one substitute teacher named Mrs. Diane. And we would whisper to each other, survivor, because she would slam the desks on our fingers, and it was just generally like understood. Mrs. Diane's not okay, and it wasn't like we were curious to hear her stories, but that was sort of separate. Like there were like actual survivors who we were afraid of. And then there was like the education, which was making us afraid of what could happen to us, right? But because I'm older than both of you, like I remember the moment where it really flipped into the immersive stuff. And, actually Birthright was born in Montreal, which is where I grew up, with the Bronfmans. And I remember, I think I heard a talk or something from Charles Bronfman where they were afraid. It was very clearly articulated. The survivors are dying. This generation, they're intermarrying, they're not connected to Israel. We need to find a way to make them afraid,
Yeah.
we need to. And so the goal of this new wave that came in the 80s of like walk-in cattle cars and this really creating like a bodily experience. I use the phrase re-traumatization, quoting my friend Cecily Sorotsky, who's one of the founders of Jewish Voice for Peace. But actually, I've been talking to scholars more recently who say, it's not really re-traumatization in the sense that it's not your trauma. It's somebody else's trauma. It's trauma appropriation.
That's right.
It's actually, there's a phrase that I came across around 9/11 memorials, which was prosthetic memory and prosthetic trauma.
Wow.
You're taking someone out. And so all of these sort of installations and re-experiences, it's to implant a trauma that was not there, right?
Yeah.
And we have a whole industry. Why do we have a whole industry? If you think about other groups with a lot of trauma in their history, I mean, we've been talking about Orange Shirt Day, and there's a whole curriculum around residential schools, and there's trainings for how to talk to survivors. It's all about avoiding re-traumatization,
That's right.
touching the trauma as lightly as possible. I mean, you know all this, Daniel, but what's so strange is like, we gave the world psychotherapy. We're supposed to be self-aware. Like, why did we never worry about this? Like, why is none of the understanding around around how you inscribe? Like, think about This Is America video, like the Childish Gambino video. Do you remember the debates about what he did in that video around showing Black people being gunned down and, re-inscribing the Charleston massacre? I remember so many Black scholars, Christina Sharp, going like, what is going on? Why am I suddenly seeing on my screen Black people being murdered? Like, why is this okay? Right. And there's so much of a discussion around, what is ethical around showing Black death, right?
And that's pop music. Like, pop music is an arena where you push, you show extreme. We're not. Donald Glover was not asked to curate a museum curriculum for children. He's an artist trying to shock.
The museum in Alabama about lynching is very careful around its sort of more elliptical.
That's right.
It's not that there's no violence that's shown, but there's a huge literature about how to sort of gesture towards it, or like how to give people space to think, hold on to their sense of agency and self, right? Have a sort of a culture of healing. Why was this not part of any of the Holocaust education?
I have a possible answer for that. So I'm not myself a trauma expert, but I wrote a book with a guy who is. Whom, and Naomi, full disclosure, Naomi and I are family friends. So there's a lot of, our families go back a long way.
Well, I just full disclosure, Naomi's done my wife's podcast. So technically we're also family friends. I didn't want to.
Following all the drama between you and her.
So there's the Canadian right there, drama. Not sorry. They say, welcome to Canada. Sorry for the drama. So what we write about in The Myth of Normal is that trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. It's about an inner constriction, an inner fracturing, an alienation from self. It leaves you diminished or compromised or stuck or separated, so that your wholeness is not experienced by you and you can't fully access all parts of you. So a traumatized person can't feel their feelings, or can't feel all their feelings. They can't express all parts of themselves. They don't know what's going on in their body. They can't say no. Things that we're born with, right? Talk about birthrights, the capacity to fully feel. And healing is the movement towards wholeness. So when things happen, shocks to the system, healing naturally wants to happen. Nature knows how to heal. A tree falls over, lightning hits it, another tree grows. Nature is always healing itself. right? And so, but it's a heal for human beings because we have minds and identities and psyches and egos. We have to participate in the healing process, and the mind can get in the way, and especially the collective psyche can get in the way. So you ask, why don't we have this awareness about it? Because the intention to heal isn't part of it.
No.
Now the intention,
there's the fear of healing.
The fear of healing, because if we healed, what then? Well, then we might have to be responsible for what we do with it,
and we lose our exceptional state.
We'd lose our state in both sense of the word. You know, we'd lose our license to act out our trauma in ways that keep us in a sense of semi-security. We'd have to have the more vulnerable kind of security of, wow, that happened. I mean, do indigenous people who go to a museum to learn about their trauma get to come out into the world and have a happy ending and be like, okay, well, but now we get to be safe because such and such? Do Black people have some kind of big triumph? No, only in culture, only in the creative arts, which is it's not a small thing. It's great. But Jews, because of this Zionist doppelganger that said, we're going to be the vindication. You don't ever have to feel that way again. And if you're saying you never have to feel that again, you will never heal. Because if you healed, you'd have to feel it. And if you never want to feel it, you better never heal.
It's interesting because, you know, I think a lot of people had no idea. People who aren't Jewish had no idea
how fucked up we are.
Yes, 100% though. I think post October 7th, a lot of people that I was talking to who knew me as like a safe person to talk to about this stuff because they were being chewed out by their Jewish friends or like a Jewish friend for posting something in support of Gaza or in support of Palestine. People were taken aback by the fervent, like the fervent way in which people would yell at them about something. Like I had a friend of mine who's an actress and comedian out here in LA, a Black woman who said, I have never been talked to by white people like this before in my life. And was so taken aback by it that she started questioning herself and going, wait, am I wrong? Is there a justified reason to do what is they're doing to the Palestinian people? And I think a lot of people have been deeply shocked by how activated people became because we have been, you know, reliving these traumas that are have been
I mean, you use the word activated. I've been thinking about like what is the I've been looking for a sort of a metaphor to describe what you're describing, right? Like these people, I mean, talk about doppelgangers, right? Like these people who were just like seemed like normal, nice people, like, you know, showing up, being good allies, and like all of a sudden they're like, and like if you're not pro genocide, right? You know, and also just kind of like claiming a status as an oppressed person that they don't, you know, merit, and so on. And we saw a lot of really wild examples of that in Hollywood.
It's deep immaturity is what it is.
This phrase "activated," it's almost like a science fiction, like Manchurian Candidate type thing, right? Yes. Where it's like this thing that called itself education, which was prosthetic trauma or re-traumatization. It's like been dormant in us, right? And then what happened was October 7th happened. It was immediately narrated as pogrom, Holocaust, you know, they're coming for you. You thought you were like, never since the Holocaust, it was completely misrepresented. Like Dan, you're talking about severed identity. Talk about severings, right? I mean, the Holocaust, first of all, is severed from everything else in history, right? And then it's like transposed to another geography, another century, another people, like
that people's reaction is severed from their
geography,
from lived experience. The actions on October 7th are severed from the territory where those people woke up that morning and what it took for them.
And if we understood colonial history, we would know that this is something that happens when in colonial history, right? That people get strangled by colonialism and occupation, and there are rebellions, and sometimes those rebellions include war crimes.
Right. Sometimes the colonized will strangle back. And
so this was like, I wrote a piece that a lot of people didn't like after October 7th, which was critical of people who I thought were responding in a way that was overly celebratory. And I was not talking about Palestinians. I was talking about just like random leftists, and not just random, some of them with very large platforms. And but I mean, part of the reason why I was sensitive to that is because I understand how it reinscribes these traumatic narratives. Like, that is such a gift to Israel, in my opinion, right? Because it helps this story. I mean, why did Israel have like a whole arm of its government just talking about how leftists had abandoned you, and because they want their people to feel that they are abandoned once again everywhere. The world is against you once again, right?
And how much they love that many of the people killed on the kibbutzim were leftists.
Oh, it's their favorite part. Their favorite part is pointing out that leftists, were the first people who were killed. So, which is, it just allows them to, do their fanfic about what would happen to me and my family. They like the idea that
God bless the families of the kibbutz victims who didn't give up their
shout out to
the principles
former
of
guest Noy Katzman,
Mao Zedong, these people who understand that the people who actually threw their relatives on the sacrificial fire, the Holocaust fire of this occupation, were not the people who pulled the triggers or
but I think it's important, like, to if you have responsible leadership in your community, when people are frightened, like, what you do is you sort of, like, a trigger reaction, right? It's like a PTSD reaction is like, you hear a truck backfiring and you think you're back in Fallujah, right?
Sure,
like, that's a classic trigger, right? You're not there. So you need someone to say, you're not there, right? That's actually what needed to happen after October 7th. You're not back there, And, if there were any cooler heads that could have prevailed, that's what they would have said. And instead, it was, you're there, you're back there, you're 100% back there. And the only thing keeping you from annihilation is
yelling at your closest black friend about how they're more racist than you are.
And then
rationalize it. It's to try to get inside the head, because we have to try to understand this, don't we? I mean,
the fact that when I saw people posting, "Would you hide me?" I was like, we are a deeply unserious people at this point. Like, we are the chosen people, and we've been chosen as a psychological experiment to, like, show the world, this is how you don't heal from trauma, and this is what happens when you don't heal from trauma.
Yes, and I think that's why I related so much to your book, Naomi, was because of the fact that I found, like, this podcast essentially is us yelling about our doppelganger and trying to get people to be like, understand, no, we're not, that's not us. Please don't think that's us. I know they keep saying that they are us, but it is a different thing. It's watching people, be activated. I mean, it's hard to talk about, finding the right word for it, because you want to do it without the anti-Semitic overtones with it, but
I wish it was as simple as it's not us. I don't know if I've ever said this on this podcast.
Right.
It somehow slips my mind every time to mention, but I feel I should actually mention it.
Yeah.
I think it's not irrelevant.
Sure.
I have a great uncle who died in the Israeli Air Force, or the Haganah Air Force, in 1948.
Right.
He flew planes in that war.
Right.
He probably bombed Arab villages. My maternal grandfather's youngest brother,
right.
Ralph Moster. I never knew him, obviously. Died long before me. But that's in my family. And I don't walk around thinking of myself as if that's part of my lineage. And it's crazy that I've completely compartmentalized that. Mm-hmm. And I grew up going to a Zionist summer camp. And I marched around every Friday night singing the Shir HaPalmach, the song of the fucking Palmach terrorist organization.
Yeah.
Now, who sent me there? My anti-Zionist father, who used to be a lifeguard there. Why did he send me there? Because it was the best summer camp experience in town, and a lot of cool people went there, and there were some Zionist questioning people, but fundamentally it was a Zionist space. I've talked about that a lot on the podcast.
Sure.
But we all have people in our families who have moved there. We are and I think this is probably what makes the doppelganger concept interesting. It's not just like, oh, you're mistaken. That's not me. Sorry, you've got the wrong. In fact, we are intimately connected with it. And all of us during this time are like in this wrenching process of inner extrication of like, well, what parts of me, what strands of me are still tied to that? Can I cleanly divorce myself from it? Or is it, are the Zionists right that in a sense, they are doing things in my name, whether I like it or not?
Right.
It's very disturbing.
Yeah. And that's the thing about doppelgangers is they are ultimately holding up a mirror to us to dare to sort of see the parts of ourselves that we have trouble admitting are there. And within doppelganger literature, if you think it's just them and you go and try to kill them, you will end up dead on the floor. And
that's right.
The plot line of almost every doppelganger, back to Dostoevsky. But you have to be careful when confronting your doppelganger because you're in there somewhere. And that doesn't mean that it has to be forever. I think that this is the work, is sort of a deprogramming, right? I think that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah. It's a combination of deprogramming, not just for, we're fighting a war on two fronts. One is the deprogramming of, those Zionists close to me or people coming out of Zionism, trying to, get them to understand the amount of propaganda that they've been exposed to, and has created a Manchurian Candidate-esque type of activation in which they are just like, we must support Netanyahu, who 1 week ago I said was a war criminal.
But he's our war criminal.
Right, exactly. And also the other front is fighting against the way that Israel and Zionism has characterized Jews of the world, which is being in lockstep together, fighting Hamas, and that we are all together supporters of the government of Israel. And so it's it's
the other piece of this that we haven't talked about is just, in the book I quote a scholar in the UK named Carolyn Rooney, a Middle East scholar, who talks about Israel as having doppelganger politics, by which she means two things. One, that Israel creates a doppelganger of the European nationalisms that had oppressed Jews for centuries.
Yes.
In the form of, we've talked about the new Jew, but the whole state, right, is kind of a doppelganger of the nationalist project that was always the enemy of the stateless Jew, right? Like, we've got our state now, and we're, and the other form of doppelganger politics is projecting everything that you cannot bear to see about yourself onto the Palestinian other. And that's like, every accusation is a confession, right? Like there's this weird mirroring that happens.
Yeah. It's funny. You just you brought up something, we have a state now. So what are you doing being stateless? The amount that mirrors the sort of evangelical, or just the Christian language of Jews. We have our Messiah now. What are you doing still being Jews? It's almost like it comes from the same place of this anti-Semitism, where it's the imperfect Jew who has the opportunity to not die is allowing themselves to die, and that I just find that an interesting parallel. Because there is that resentment of Jews in the diaspora that a lot of Israelis have is like, what are you doing not living in the Jewish state? By not living in the Jewish state, you are putting yourself in danger, and you're putting all of us in danger. You are abandoning your God, and you're abandoning your people. And it's the same kind of, it's a similar resentment you see, throughout Christendom with regards to Jews, as being these like stubborn people who turn their back on on the Messiah Christ. So it's almost as if the Messiah in
but of course,
Zionism is the state.
But, you know, Palestinians become the doppelganger of the Nazi, right?
Absolutely,
this is what we're seeing. And I think that, you know, one of the things that I've, you know, it's become clear to me that I just did this deep dive into October 7 memory culture, right? And I put that in quotes because there's something kind of extraordinary that's happened in this past year where it usually takes a couple decades for an event to be sort of metabolized into culture, right?
I know.
September 11th is an exception to that. It was immediately kind of turned into gallery art and turned into disaster films. But I don't think we've ever seen anything on the scale of the sort of October 7th recreation industry.
No, it's more like a laboratory culture where you put organisms in a broth and you let them grow and whatever. And these
culture.
You know, like the Nova Festival re-traumatization or prosthetic trauma exhibit is an opportunity for you, the viewer, to go in and create your own. It's Total Recall. You know, you get to go in as
create
if
your
you
own
were
memory.
there. And I remember when
I'm dancing, I'm camping. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Whoa, it's so intense.
We've invented so many things, guys.
And there's VR, you know, there's VR goggles and you can go to the houses.
Did you go, Naomi? One of our previous guests did.
No, because I think you had Maya Rosen on. That was such a great.
No, we had
Brace Belden from TrueAnon who gave his report from the Nova Festival exhibit. Yeah.
Oh no. Maya Rosen wrote an incredible piece in Jewish Currents about so-called dark tourism.
Yeah.
But you know, there's the tours of the site of the Nova Festival and the kibbutz, the kibbutz
in Israel, yes,
in Israel. But then you can also have a VR experience of it, where you do have goggles and you have a guided tour. It's kind of like
the fact that this kind of stuff is normalized is insane. We were talking earlier,
riding on the backs of a lot of this Holocaust.
Yes,
immersive education. They use the word immersive all the time. Like you're going to have an immersive experience, right? And so I think that this absolute conflation of Palestinians and Nazis, October 7th, Holocaust.
Yes.
It's a kind of, I mean, what's happening is the moment that we're in is, I mean, the foundational crime of the state of Israel is the Nakba, the ongoing Nakba. That's what can't be looked at. That your happy ending is absolutely entangled with another people's ethnic cleansing, dispossession, exile. It's impossible to look at that. So that is the ultimate dismembering. It's dismembering Israel from history, geography, you know, imposing this kind of other story onto that land.
Yeah.
And that is, and so if you can, after the fact, finally prove Palestinians are Nazis, that's what's going on with all of this October 7th conflation, right? Because there's always been this discourse, you know, the Mufti of Jerusalem and all that, but it's never been like this, where you now have this whole cultural apparatus that is specifically designed to blur the lines between October 7th and the Holocaust. I mean, the Shoah Foundation now has added a chapter where after you listen to the testimonials of Holocaust survivors, you listen to testimonies from survivors of October 7th. Okay. So this is collapsing space and time. You know, the same thing is happening with March of the Living. Now they're hearing from people who survived October 7th. You know, everything is being collapsed, and it's being collapsed for a reason, because this then allows people to really nail this false claim, this false equation of Palestinians with Nazis. And if that's true, then, as to quote Jared Kushner, finish the job. Okay. Yeah. And so, like, we're on a knife edge. We have to understand the psychology at work and how dangerous these stories are, because it's not ending, right? It's not ending at all.
No, the ultimate fantasy for Jews, I think, and this is, I don't know, this is maybe getting deeply psychosexual on some level, and Israel is a very psychosexual entity, but to get to play both sides in the Holocaust role play is that we get to be the forever recipients and victims, and at the same time we get to be the perpetrators. And so in real life, we get to be the perpetrators. And then we dress the Palestinians up as the perpetrators and say, look, they're doing it to us, and now we're the victims. Yeah, it's sickening.
We could spend our whole lives trying to understand it, or we could stop it.
I would rather have no Holocaust education at all than to have a Holocaust education that's doing what you just said.
Yeah,
I would rather just say we're never going to talk about it again than to talk like. And my great grandparents died in Auschwitz. It's honestly, it would honor their memories more.
Yeah,
it's terrible violence to their memories.
It would honor their memories more to say we don't speak about it than to say we're going to get addicted to the rush of fake aliveness we get from identifying as the people to whom this will never stop happening, and thus whatever we do to others either isn't happening, and when it is happening, wink, 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 let's celebrate on national television like you see on Israel's channel 12 and 14 when they go blow up pagers and whatever. I mean,
yeah, where you just see abject cruelty and the celebration of, children being killed, and it all leads back to this, annoying topic of anti-Semitism that I find myself, inextricably linked to, because I have to try to explain that the nation that talks about being the number one, defensive organism against anti-Semitism is the one exporting the most anti-Semitism in my lifetime. And trying to, you talk about in the book the way in which the right wing kind of co-ops left-wing language, right? Or, even left-wing causes that have been dropped by like liberal democratic establishment. And it's almost like with regards to Israel, because, they are saying we are against anti-Semitism the loudest and, first almost for most people, that it's hard to convince other people, no, guys, this is an anti-Semitic project. This is a project that it puts every single person on this podcast in danger right now. Zionism preys on us. Zionism is not protecting us from anything. And so it's it's tough to do that when you see so many people who at this point are going, I don't even believe, if someone says anti-Semitism, I just tune it out, which is a dangerous thing. Like, that makes me uncomfortable. And it's one of those things where I understand it. I understand the phrase being watered down. People saying anti-Semitism for anything that's a criticism of Israel makes people believe that, oh, you're just doing propaganda. Yeah. But anti-Semitism does exist, and Israel is is the number one exporter of it. And so I live with the fear of where this is, all going. And that's me centering, obviously, myself and not, the present victims of Israel's genocide, which I also feel shame about. So, it's a nice little psychological soup that I live in at all times.
Right. And that's the other piece of it, is that while we're having this inside Jewish baseball conversation, which is very important and very relevant to people outside of being Jewish.
Yeah.
There's a whole cosmos of grief and shock and rage and fear and terror as every day more and more bombs rain down with impunity, and an entire region is taunted and beckoned and goaded into a conflagration that no one except this fucking lunatic state actually wants. And how are they supposed to feel? And at what point are they? At what point would we blame them for saying, you know what, I don't give a fuck.
I know.
Actually, about your concerns about
future anti-Semitism,
or how the Jews look right now.
Yeah, or how Israel is victimizing you.
Yeah,
and I agree. I can't blame people for rolling their eyes or for saying tough shit. But for only leaving us a 4-star review. Right, exactly. Yeah, 4-star review, took away 1 star because they talk about anti-Semitism too much. Yeah. So
There's a great quote. I wish I had it. It's my friend Molly Crabapple's writing this book about the Bund. It's finished. Well, it's in draft. I've read the draft. It's so fucking good.
Oh, good. I love Molly.
It's just going to be so good for when it's out in the world. I can't wait for it to be out in the world. She has this great quote from a Bundist anti-Zionist in the 40s, where he said, we're neither exceptional in our chosenness or in our victimhood.
Love that.
There's an early essay that had a big impact on me, and I think we should try to keep in mind as we enter into the re-traumatization hyperdrive of hitting the 1 year mark.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, it's worth people knowing that the families in the kibbutz that were hit hardest are boycotting Netanyahu's ceremony, so much so that they had to cancel the live audience because they were afraid of being disrupted. But they're going to put on a show, and it'll be broadcast to the world. No live audience; they had to cancel it. But there's a really great Australian anthropologist of Lebanese descent, Ghassan Haj, who wrote an essay in November talking about how hard it was to sort of comply with the demands for condemnation and so on, and it wasn't because he didn't condemn the actions, but he said that what was being demanded of him was a supremacist mourning. Supremacist mourning. And he said, unlike Palestinians who are murdered all the time, the murdered Israelis were special. They were superior dead people who needed to be revenged in a way that reminds everyone, but particularly the killers, of how superior they were.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think it's one of the most powerful essays that's been written this year. And he's one of the people who got blacklisted in Germany.
Wow.
Great guy. That's what we're going to be seeing, some supremacist mourning, which doesn't mean I think people have a right to grieve, but that's different than what's going to be going on in it. The message it's going to be sending.
Well, this is the thing.
The world.
Well, but I love that you said that, because we talk about the intention of healing versus the intention of staying broken.
Mm-hmm.
Grief, I call it, and this is mine. My dad didn't make this one up. This is my own. I call grief the great conveyor belt. It takes us from the land of how could this be? This shouldn't have been. It should have been some other way. And this is whether you're mourning a loved one who died, or you're mourning the loss of a relationship, or you're in one reality. Something happens that is a shock to the worldview of permanence that we all labor inside of, which the Buddhists know is the root of all suffering, believing that anything is permanent. But there are certain shocks in life that are more shocking than others. And someone is gone, and our system can't compute. And grief is actually a physical nervous system process that takes us on this conveyor belt faster than it would if we had to just get used to it, to shake off that old paradigm and get used to a new one and feel all the things and let our nervous system process it all, right? So grief is actually supposed to be healing. Mm-hmm. Just like memory and memorialization and collective mourning is like what a good museum would do, is supposed to be healing, just like good education is supposed to be healing. So if we were to actually let ourselves feel the full grief about October 7th, that would be one thing, but that would also require that you wouldn't be able to put up an apartheid wall around that grief. Yeah. You'd have to feel all the grief connected to it of cause and consequence. And you'd have to feel the grief that something, and you might, your system through its own innate God-given intelligence might make some connections to other people's sufferings and to, karmic dynamics that resulted in that day and the implications of that. And so what we're going to see on October 7th is not grief. Mm-mm. It's not mourning. It's pageantry. Yeah. It's a kind of emotional pornography. Mm-hmm. And pornography only has, it's always driving towards the same money shot so that it can just re-up itself over and over again. Yeah. And it's about getting that feeling, never getting through it, never getting to those, and never reclaiming our fullness, our wholeness, our truth, our full selves. And thus we can never be fully in the world. We can never belong, which is the perfect condition for Zionism to keep festering, because Zionism is a perpetual unbelonging machine.
Well, I got caught up on all of the porn jokes I wasn't going to make, and
make them.
No, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it because you know what?
Shoot your
That's
shot,
a good
Matt.
sermon. That's a good sermon. I think the last word.
Well, I think that was great. This has been a great show. Daniel, I know you had the thing you wanted to read.
Yeah. So I got an incredible text the other day, and I thought this would be a great place to end. Especially since this came from a fellow Canadian Jew, Naomi. Someone, I do these mental chiropractic walks with people. This is a side business of mine where I help people get unstuck through conversation while walking. And a fellow Canadian Jew wanted to walk with me to talk about her.
I'm never living that down.
Her grief, her difficulty in her relationship with her father. Now, this is a person I won't even name the city, but a mainstream Canadian Jewish community, Talmud Torah kind of tier Canadian Jews, you know the type. And this person had an awakening, an inconvenient, unexpected, unasked for awakening since October 7th. Probably it was percolating for years, getting a sense of what this Israel thing really is and what it's doing to us. And when she took this walk with me, she was wondering, how do I keep having a relationship with my father while pretending to him that I still agree with him about Zionism? Because she had a strong sense, and he had almost intimated it, almost in as many words, that if he was to find out that one of his children was anti-Zionist, like some of these newfangled JVP protesters, he would disown them. He would no longer have any contact with the grandkids. I mean, it was that kind of breaking point.
Talk about severing. You're willing to give up your own kids.
100%.
Yes.
And I took a walk with this person. This was in early January. And I basically said, you can keep up the charade as long as you feel you can, but don't think this is going to get any easier, you know? And she took it under advisement, but she wasn't quite ready. Well, a few months later, the dam broke, and there's just been a series of conversations since then. She just can't keep it in anymore. And of course, his insecurities have been bubbling over, and he feels the distance from her emotionally.
Sure.
And so he inquires. Anyway, so this is the latest. I just got this today. Have we got that?
Yeah.
On us. So this is the text, and I'm sharing this with her permission. She said, "I've been wanting to give you a small update out of interest and as a window. There was a breaking point with my dad in June. Circumstances led to having a genuine conversation, but it only lasted a short while until he snapped. He said horrible things and attempted to disown me. He told me to find a new dad, and worse. This woman's in her mid-30s. Her father's probably in his 70s. We didn't talk for a week. My mom brokered a short but formal apology, and since then we have an operating relationship, including elements of love. I am thankful the coercive mind control conditions have been somewhat lifted, but obviously I struggle to find a way to have genuine love for him and with him every day. His reaction was so profoundly telling. In our only follow-up conversation to his apology text, he'd said my conclusions, quote, contradict his whole life, his life's work, his DNA. He's got power, poison, pain, and joy inside his DNA, right? As Kendrick Lamar said. He said that this is the worst thing they could imagine as parents. I know you know this about the Zionist psyche. It doesn't make it, I think she means less, not more scary to encounter the depths of it in real time. Yet I somehow don't want you to give up on trying to reason with them. And I think she also means that for herself. She doesn't want to give up on trying to reason with them. I know they are truly deranged and so completely indoctrinated, yet my dad's reaction also has the hope of showing how fragile his worldview is. Yes, because he constructs identity with one, as one with Israel, his sense of reality is clearly no more stable than that belligerent state itself. I love that sentence. There has to be a breaking point of his own, or at least some of them. And then skipping down to next paragraph. It's interesting, the thing that broke him in the conversation. We were managing to stay in it respectfully for a while. And this is the doppelganger point here, Naomi, when we remained in the abstract. I even got him to admit the basic contradiction between democracy and a Jewish state. He was forced to call it a special kind of democracy, LOL.
Democracy plus.
Yeah. Theory was a bit safer. An exceptional democracy.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't have it any other way. We're special people, a chosen democracy.
Yeah.
What made him see red, as he called it, was when I dared suggest that the hostages were more afraid of the IDF than their captors. Seems so simple and obvious, and yet it struck the heart that holds everything together. The audacity to suggest we are anything like the savages, or the unthinkable that we could be worse. Just one threat to the distinction between us and them, and everything crumbled. The conversation collapsed. It's incredible to witness how desperately this entity clings to righteousness by making the line separating us from them impenetrable. Without that line, the entire illusion falls apart. I guess it was interesting because of all the things we were able to respectfully discuss. It was mere humanity that shattered everything. Again, I know we understand this. It's basic dehumanization and surface of depopulation, but it's still wild to watch it manifest in real time. Just one reference to equivalence. I mean, I know the fury was building, but yet it was still so basic and so mortal. And then just as a little epigraph, she sent me this as a PS. Also, months ago, I realized that somehow a copy of The Shock Doctrine found its way onto the bookshelf in my dad's office. I always think of that book with a smile, knowing there's truth, a dissenter in the room with him at all times, hiding in plain sight.
You didn't get to the last chapter.
But he got most of the way there.
Wow.
Maybe he'll read Doppelganger and just stop right at the third act of the book.
Thanks for sharing that. And please thank your friend for sharing it with us.
I will, yeah. Anything jump out at you from that?
Honestly, nothing that's hopeful, because I think that, I have changed older generations' minds. I'm not going to name any names. I've had like lifetimes of conversations that eventually lead to a breakthrough. Not with my own parents, but with other folks. And people can change, But the thing that I'm worried about, I feel really grateful that the people who I'm thinking of changed before this genocide. Because if you're part of the machinery of rationalizing it, right, you become so much more invested in the story.
Yes.
Because now you said it was okay to bomb hospitals. Now you're a doctor who said it was okay to bomb, a neonatal ICU. How are you going to live with that? And I'm scared of how much harder it's gotten because of that.
Yep.
And because the people we need to be, learning to tell a story that is not a story of severings, but is a story of connection with, are not going to want to talk to us in the same way. Certainly not Israelis. And I feel all we can do is just put one foot in front of the other and try to work where we can and build community and build another way to be Jews, which I know we've all been doing. But it's not going to be a fast fix.
No.
Yeah.
Well, what I acknowledged this person for was her stand in the matter, was that because really it did look to her like it was like she was going to lose her father entirely.
Yeah.
And that she couldn't, not just that she was going to lose his love, but you can hear it. She's still struggling to love him, but she's struggling. She's wrestling, which is what Yisrael, that's what the name means, wrestling with God, right? Because Jacob, was it Isaac? It was Jacob. One of those biblical guys. Wrestled with God, got renamed Israel, and she's wrestling with that question. And she hasn't thrown him under the bus or thrown him off the cliff. He's still there. She may not talk to him much. But she's being real with him. And she's standing her ground calmly and openly but firmly and letting him be uncomfortable. And you can see him, he's just thrashing and writhing on the hook because it's so painful. And she's not causing him that pain. It's the pain of the contradictions he's trying to rationalize. And she's saying, I will not perform filial loyalty to you. She's being Cordelia right now, like I'm not going to perform family loyalty by pretending to you. like it's the loving thing to hold on to your illusions. Yeah. Your illusions are dying, and that's what's killing you. And I love you, and I'm watching it happen. and I can't help you except to be available to you when you're ready. I just really admire that. I don't have anyone in my family who disagrees with me on this, so I haven't. People, so many people are like, "Oh, your family is so courageous for speaking out." Kind of not. We're not. We're loudmouths, and we're talented at being loudmouths, and we're willing to use our voices, which takes a certain degree of courage. But there are Jews who have
and you have each other,
and we have each other. No,
you know, I mean, this is the thing. Is like this is why, you know, I often, as a sort of a movement elder, you know, like I'm often just in the position of just trying to tell people to be nicer to each other, because I really do feel that, you know, people are, you know, somebody said to me that they described it as severing limb after limb of their family tree, you know? Yeah. So like we like all like for a lot of folks, all they have is this movement. So if the movement treats them like shit, it's really, really hard, you know? Yeah. And it's very, very hard to organize in the middle of a genocide. But like we do have to try to hold each other.
Yes.
Yeah. It was really a great letter, and it makes me feel like kind of a cow, because I just blocked my cousins on Twitter. That's how I've dealt with it. Because you know, you can only have so many text conversations in which they, you know, tell you that traitors will be dealt with at the end of the war, before you're just like, I'll just block this person. It really, Daniel, that was amazing, and I thank you for sharing that on the podcast. And Naomi, I thank you for coming on the podcast and talking to us. This is, you know, of all of the shows that I've seen you on, this is probably the silliest one that you've been on. So I appreciate you for coming on and
I think
talking
you guys
to
are
us.
amazing. Really appreciate you.
Well, I think you are amazing, and I thank you. Where can the audience find your work?
Well, this big piece about October 7th is coming out in The Guardian with any luck on Saturday, and yeah, where, I don't know.
Are you still on Twitter? Yeah, you're still on Twitter.
Right. I also do a lot of stuff with Mehdi Hasan.
Yes, that's
you're
right.
You're at Zeteo.
Me and Mehdi have a monthly thing. Yeah.
So check that out. We're going to be putting links in the show notes. Once again, Naomi Klein.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Naomi.
Bye.
And thanks to all of you out there who listen to this podcast, and all of you who subscribe on Patreon, patreon.com/badhasbara.
Thanks for listening to the funny, silly, wacky, whimsical episodes. Thanks for tuning into the slightly more sober, serious episodes where Matt and I pretend to have depth.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm pretending. I think deep down, underneath all the puns that you do, I think you might actually have depth, which is kind of intimidating, because it's like, you know, I'm over here just kind of pretending to feel feelings.
I take irony pills to try and cover it up, but I think they're wearing off. I think I need to increase my dosage.
Yeah. I let me be clear. I feel feelings. But I just, I don't know how to express them. Deep down, you know, it's because like deep down, I'm a deeply stupid person, but very emotionally intelligent. I don't know what I'm doing. I think we're self-hating for no reason.
Yeah, no, we're sensitive guys, and it comes out in all kinds of different ways. But we appreciate all of you, no matter what attracts you to this Cockamamie podcast.
Yeah, even if it's a Telegram group that told you to go on and give us 1 star.
And hey, if you tuned in to get, if you're Israeli, look, come here, Habibi. If you tuned in to leave us 1 star and you learned anything at all today, you enjoyed it at all, you laughed at one joke, you got a little slightly tumescent looking at one of our versions of Jewish facial hair.
Yeah.
Why don't you go leave us 2 stars?
Yeah.
Or even 3. Why don't you just go leave like a 3.5 star? Just neutralize the algorithm for us.
Help bring in the new year by giving us, how about 3 stars? You know, That's a way of, repenting. That's a way of doing some penance. Come on, man. Be nice about it. But if you're not one of those people from the Telegram group, once again, go to Spotify. Give us 5 stars. All right. badasbar@gmail.com. And thanks, everyone, so much for listening. Until next time, from the river to the sea.
Don't do trauma prosthetically.
Jumping jacks was us. Push-ups was us. Krav Maga us. All